Today we will first talk about colonial life and society, and then we will move on to discuss enlightenment. Colonial life in America was shaped by various factors: family, social class and gender roles, race, and economic changes. These elements influence almost every facet of daily life, and understanding them provides essential context for the broader developments in American society during this period. Let's break this down one by one to explore how these aspects defined life in the American colonies, setting the stage for future social developments. Colonial society was fundamentally structured around the family unit, which was central to social organization and economic life. Most people in the colonies lived in family groups, and unlike the earliest years of settlement, colonial families were typically large due to high birth rates. It's important to understand how these families functioned beyond just their size, as their internal dynamics reflected broader societal norms, especially regarding gender and power. The father, in most households, was considered the legal and economic head. This structure, known as patriarchy, was deeply entrenched in colonial society. The father controlled the family's property and labor, made decisions about the household, and even determined when and whom his children would marry. This position of authority extended to matters of inheritance, land use, and financial decisions. Fathers were expected to represent their families in public sphere, such as in legal and political matters, reinforcing their dominance within the household and community. Women, in contrast, held a subordinate legal and social status. Under English common law, a married woman became feme covert, meaning her legal identity was essentially merged with her husband's. She could not own property, sign contracts, or conduct business in her own name. This legal status made women dependent on their husbands for most of their lives. However, in the case of widowhood, some women became feme sole, which allowed them greater economic independence and the ability to manage property and businesses. Despite these limited freedoms, most women's lives revolved around childbearing, rearing children, and managing the household, roles that were considered their primary societal contributions. It's important to recognize that the roles of women varied by region and class. In New England, for instance, women were heavily involved in domestic production, contributing to the economy through activities like spinning, weaving, and preserving food. In the southern colonies, where plantation agriculture dominated, women, particularly in elite families, were responsible for overseeing household slaves and maintaining the home, while poorer women worked the fields alongside their husbands. Children played a significant role in colonial families, not only as future heirs, but also as contributors to the household economy. From a young age, children were expected to perform small tasks that benefited the family, and as they grew older, they took on more substantial responsibilities such as working in the fields or learning a trade. This hands-on experience was a form of education in itself, as children learned essential skills by assisting their parents in daily chores or by apprenticing with skilled tradesmen. The idea of formal education varied widely depending on social class and geography. In wealthier families, particularly in urban areas, boys were more likely to attend school or even college, preparing them for roles in business, government, or clergy. Girls, on the other hand, were generally educated in domestic skills, though some affluent families taught their daughters to read and write. The education of girls was often seen as important only to the extent that it would help them manage a household and raise children. However, over time, attitudes towards children and education began to evolve, influenced by Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, who famously wrote about the mind being a blank slate. Locke's ideas emphasized the importance of shaping children through positive guidance and education rather than through punishment and strict discipline. This shift in thinking led to a gradual re-evaluation of child-rearing practices, particularly among the middle and upper classes, where education became more formalized. For boys, education often included instruction in Latin, mathematics, and classical literature, subjects that were seen as essential for leadership roles. Girls, when they received formal education, were often limited to subjects such as music, sewing, and etiquette, reflecting their expected future roles as wives and mothers. Race played a significant role in the development of colonial society, particularly in the establishment of slavery. Initially, the English colonists did not conceive of race in the modern sense. Instead, they divided the world along lines of civilized Christians versus savages. However, as the transatlantic slave trade expanded in the late 17th century, racial distinctions became more pronounced. By the 18th century, racial categories had hardened, particularly between whites and Africans. The demand for labor on large southern plantations, especially those producing tobacco, rice, and indigo, led to the widespread use of African slaves. The colonies passed laws that not only made slavery a lifelong condition, but also tied it to race, ensuring that people of African descent and their descendants would be enslaved permanently. One of the earliest and most influential pieces of legislation was Virginia's Slave Codes of 1705. These laws declared that all African slaves and their descendants would remain enslaved for life, codifying slavery as an inherited status based on race. These codes also stripped enslaved people of any legal rights and restricted interactions between enslaved Africans and free white colonists, further entrenching racial divisions. Furthermore, slavery played a crucial role in shaping the political and legal system of the colonies. Laws were enacted not only to maintain control over the enslaved population, but also to prevent potential alliances between enslaved Africans and poor whites, who shared common grievances against the elite. The Bacon's Rebellion of 1676, in which indentured servants and African slaves united in an uprising against the ruling class in Virginia, demonstrated the potential threat of cross-racial solidarity. In response, colonial elites intensified racial divisions by granting more privileges to poor whites, further entrenching a racially stratified society. Social class in the colonies was becoming more distinct by the early 18th century, with a wealthy elite class emerging at the top of the social hierarchy. This elite class was composed of large landowners, wealthy merchants, and political leaders who often lived lives that mirrored European aristocracy. They built large homes, wore fine clothes, and participated in politics at both the local and colonial levels. Their wealth allowed them to assert significant influence over colonial society, particularly in shaping economic and political policies. At the opposite end of the spectrum were the laboring poor, a class that included enslaved Africans, indentured servants, and landless white colonists. These individuals had little to no political or social mobility, and their lives were characterized by hard labor and limited opportunities for advancement. Enslaved people, in particular, were the backbone of the southern economy, working on plantations to produce cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. Indentured servants, though technically free after their term of service, often found themselves in precarious economic situations with limited access to land or employment. In the middle of colonial society were the yeoman farmers, landowners who worked their own land and made a modest living. Although not wealthy, these farmers were independent, and their ownership of land afforded them a level of political participation. In fact, political rights were more widely distributed in the colonies than in Europe, as most white men who owned land could vote. This relative political freedom compared to Europe contributed to the development of a more engaged and politically active population. The economic landscape of the colonies was also undergoing significant changes during this period. The rise of transatlantic trade brought increased wealth to the colonies, particularly in port cities like Boston, New York, and Charleston. Merchants who engaged in trade with Europe and the West Indies accumulated vast fortunes, further entrenching the division between the wealthy elite and the laboring poor. At the same time, the growth of plantation economy in the South relied heavily on enslaved labor, creating a stark contrast between the wealth of plantation owners and the poverty of the enslaved population. Now we will talk about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a profound intellectual movement that began in Europe in the late 17th century and continued through the 18th century. It marked a dramatic shift in thought, emphasizing reason, science, and skepticism of traditional authority, particularly religious and monarchical institutions. The Enlightenment had a transformative impact on a wide range of fields, from political theory to economics, and its influence extended across the Atlantic to the American colonies. The philosophical foundation of the Enlightenment can be traced back to earlier thinkers, particularly René Descartes, whose famous dictum, cogito ergo sum, that means I think, therefore I am, emphasized the primacy of human reason as the source of knowledge. Descartes' approach to philosophy was revolutionary because it rejected the reliance on religious dogma and traditional authority that had dominated medieval thought. Instead, Descartes argued that individuals should use reason and logic to arrive at truth. This shift towards rationalism encouraged a new approach to understanding the world, one that relied on critical thinking, empirical evidence, and skepticism of accepted beliefs. Descartes' emphasis on questioning everything that could not be substantiated through reason and evidence laid the groundwork for the broader Enlightenment movement, which sought to apply these principles to all areas of human inquiry, from science to politics to morality. The scientific revolution, which preceded the Enlightenment, played a crucial role in shaping Enlightenment thought. The discoveries of scientists like Sir Isaac Newton exemplified the Enlightenment's commitment to empirical research and rational inquiry. Newton's work in physics, particularly his laws of motion and universal gravitation, demonstrated that natural phenomena could be explained through universal laws that applied to all matter in the universe. This marked a departure from the medieval view that the universe was governed by divine will and supernatural forces. Newton's contributions were instrumental in establishing a framework for scientific inquiry that emphasized observation, experimentation, and the formulation of general principles based on empirical evidence. His work not only advanced the field of physics, but also reinforced the Enlightenment belief that human reason could uncover the mysteries of the natural world. The success of the scientific method in explaining natural phenomena provided a powerful argument for applying reason and empirical methods to other fields, such as politics, economics, and ethics. The Enlightenment was characterized by the contributions of several influential thinkers, each of whom advanced ideas that would shape the intellectual landscape of the 18th century and beyond. These thinkers addressed a wide range of topics, from political theory to economics, and their ideas had a profound impact on both European and American society. One of the most important figures of the Enlightenment was John Locke, whose contributions to political theory and philosophy were foundational to the movement. Locke's ideas on human understanding and the social contract were groundbreaking, particularly his assertion that individuals possessed natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Locke argued that governments were established to protect these rights, and that if a government failed to do so, the people had the right to overthrow it. Locke's theories of government, particularly his ideas about the consent of the governed and the right of rebellion against tyrannical rulers, provided a philosophical justification for challenging traditional forms of authority. These ideas were especially influential in the American colonies, where colonial leaders drew on Locke's theories to justify their struggle for independence from Britain. Locke's influence can be seen in the Declaration of Independence, which echoes his assertion that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, and that the people have the right to alter or abolish any government that violates their natural rights. Another key figure of the Enlightenment was Montesquieu, whose work, The Spirit of the Laws, introduced the idea of the separation of powers within government. Montesquieu argued that political power should be divided among different branches of government to prevent any single entity from becoming too powerful. This concept of checks and balances was revolutionary and would have a lasting impact on the design of modern democratic institutions. Montesquieu's analysis of different forms of government and his advocacy for the separation of powers greatly influenced the framers of the US Constitution, who incorporated his ideas into the structure of American government. The system of checks and balances in the US Constitution is a direct reflection of Montesquieu's belief that the best way to prevent tyranny was to distribute political power across multiple branches of government. Known for his wit and satirical writings, Voltaire was a fierce critic of religious dogma and institutional authority. His works use humor and satire to challenge established institutions and promote the values of reason and tolerance. Voltaire's criticism of the Catholic Church and his advocacy for civil liberties, freedom and speech, and religious tolerance made him one of the most prominent figures of Enlightenment thought. Voltaire's emphasis on reason and skepticism of traditional authority contributed to the development of a more secular and rational approach to understanding society. His writings encouraged individuals to question established norms and embrace Enlightenment principles, such as the pursuit of knowledge through reason and the rejection of superstition and irrationality. In the realm of economics, Adam Smith's work, The Wealth of Nations, was revolutionary. Smith challenged the prevailing economic doctrine of mercantilism, which emphasized state control of trade and the accumulation of wealth through strict regulation. Instead, Smith advocated for free market principles, arguing that individuals pursuing their self-interest could lead to societal benefits through the invisible hand of the market. Smith's ideas laid the foundation for modern economic theory and influenced economic policies on both sides of the Atlantic. His advocacy for free markets and limited government intervention provided a new perspective on economic policy that would shape the development of capitalist economies in the 19th and 20th century. By the mid-18th century, Enlightenment ideas had spread beyond Europe to the American colonies, where they began to influence intellectual and political thought. The Enlightenment played a crucial role in shaping the intellectual landscape of the colonies, particularly in areas such as governance, education, and religion. One of the most ambitious projects of Enlightenment was Encyclopedia, spearheaded by Denis Diderot. This monumental work aimed to compile and systematize all human knowledge up to that point, reflecting the Enlightenment's values of reason, empirical evidence, and skepticism of traditional doctrines. The Encyclopedia included articles on a wide range of topics, from science and technology to philosophy and politics. The Encyclopedia played a crucial role in spreading Enlightenment ideas by making knowledge accessible to a broader audience. It was not merely an academic resource, but also a tool for promoting critical thinking and challenging established norms. The work was instrumental in disseminating Enlightenment principles such as secularism, rationalism, and the questioning of religious and political authority. Salons and coffee houses were also central to the dissemination of Enlightenment ideas. Salons were gatherings where intellectuals, writers, and philosophers discussed new ideas in a relatively informal setting. These gatherings encouraged the free exchange of thoughts and facilitated the spread of Enlightenment philosophies among educated circles. Coffee houses, which became increasingly popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, served as public spaces for intellectual discussion. In these establishments, patrons engaged in debates on politics, science, and philosophy, furthering the reach of Enlightenment ideas. Coffee houses also played a role in the formation of public opinion and the shaping of political and social discourse. As Enlightenment ideas took hold, deism emerged as a response to traditional religious doctrines. Deists, influenced by the findings of scientists like Isaac Newton, viewed the universe as a well-ordered clock created by a divine clockmaker. They believed that human reason, rather than religious revelation, was the primary means of understanding the natural world and moral disciplines. Deism represented a significant departure from traditional religious views. Deists rejected the idea of miracles and divine intervention, arguing instead that the universe operated according to natural laws that could be understood through reason and observation. This emphasis on reason and skepticism of religious texts reflected the broader Enlightenment belief in the power of human intellect to uncover truth without relying on supernatural explanation. Prominent figures in the American colonies, such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, were influenced by these principles. Jefferson's writing, including his famous Jefferson Bible, reflect his belief in a rational, orderly universe governed by natural laws. Franklin, too, championed the values of reason, empirical inquiry, and religious tolerance, which are central to Enlightenment thought. The Enlightenment had a profound influence on various aspects of colonial life, particularly in the realms of governance, education, and intellectual thought. Enlightenment principles helped shape the political institutions of the American colonies and played a crucial role in the intellectual development of the future leaders of the United States. One of the most significant impacts of the Enlightenment on colonial America was in the realm of political thought. The Enlightenment emphasis on reason, individual rights, and the social contract provided a theoretical foundation for revolutionary thought in American colonies. The ideas of thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu were instrumental in shaping the intellectual climate that led to the American Revolution. Locke's theories of natural rights and the social contract provided a philosophical justification for challenging British authority, while Montesquieu's ideas on separation of powers influenced the design of the US Constitution. The Enlightenment's influence on governance is evident in the Declaration of Independence, which articulates the principle that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, and that individuals have the right to overthrow oppressive governments. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and individual rights also shaped the creation of the United States Constitution, which established a system of governance based on checks and balances, reflecting the Enlightenment's commitment to rational governance and the protection of individual liberties. The Enlightenment also had a profound impact on educational and intellectual life in the American colonies. The movement's emphasis on reason, science, and empirical knowledge fostered a culture of inquiry and innovation, which contributed to the development of new educational institutions and intellectual networks. The establishment of colleges such as Harvard, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania reflected the Enlightenment's values of intellectual curiosity and critical thinking. These institutions became centers of Enlightenment thought, offering a curriculum that emphasized secular subjects, scientific inquiry, and modern languages. The Enlightenment's influence on education extended beyond the curriculum to broader educational reforms. Enlightenment thinkers advocated for universal education, arguing that education was essential for personal development and societal progress. This emphasis on education helped lay the groundwork for future reforms, including the establishment of public education system in the 19th century. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, equality, and individual rights had a profound impact on various aspects of society, including the role and status of women. The period's intellectual currents contributed to early discussions about women's rights and education, laying the groundwork for future advancements in gender equality. One of the most significant figures in the early advocacy for women's rights was Mary Wollstonecraft, whose seminal work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, challenged prevailing notions of female inferiority and argued for women's equality in education and society. Wollstonecraft's arguments were rooted in Enlightenment principles of reason and individual rights, and she contended that women, like men, were rational beings who deserved the same opportunities for education and self-improvement. Wollstonecraft's work represented a radical challenge to traditional gender roles and helped spark early debates about the role of women in society. Her call for educational reforms was particularly influential, as she argued that denying women access to education not only harmed women but also undermined the progress of society as a whole. Wollstonecraft envisioned a society in which women could cultivate their intellect and moral character, thereby becoming better citizens and contributing more effectively to the common good. Other Enlightenment thinkers, such as Voltaire, also contributed to early discussions about women's rights, though their views were often more moderate. Voltaire's advocacy for reason and criticism of established institutions indirectly supported arguments for greater gender equality. The Enlightenment's emphasis on education and reason also led to the establishment of schools and academies that offered educational opportunities to women. While women's education remained limited compared to men's, these institutions represented a significant step toward expanding access to learning for women. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, institutions such as Young Ladies' Academy of Philadelphia and Litchfield Female Academy were founded to provide women with access to formal education. These schools offered courses in subjects such as literature, science, and languages, which had previously been reserved for men. Despite these advances, women continued to face significant barriers to education, particularly due to social norms that restricted women's role in the domestic sphere. However, the progress made during the Enlightenment laid the groundwork for future reforms and helped challenge traditional views about women's capabilities and potential. The Enlightenment was a transformative period that reshaped the intellectual, political, and social landscape of the American colonies. Its emphasis on reason, science, and individual rights played a critical role in the formation of American government and culture. Although it was not without limitations, particularly in terms of gender equality, the Enlightenment laid the intellectual foundations for future advancements in democracy, education, and social reform. The legacy of Enlightenment continues to influence modern thought, governance, and social progress, making it one of the most important intellectual movements in history.